night that changed everything. The entire NBA world stopped breathing when Chet Holmgren walked off that floor. Not because Oklahoma City lost. Not because San Antonio survived. Not even because Victor Wembanyama looked like the future of basketball standing in the middle of the storm. No, the reason everybody is talking right now is much darker, much louder, and much more uncomfortable. Chet Holmgren, the 7-foot cornerstone of the Oklahoma City Thunder, the all-star big man, the player who was supposed to stand next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and help carry this franchise into a new dynasty, stepped into the biggest game of his life and disappeared. 4 points, 2 shot attempts, 33 minutes. Read that again. 33 minutes in a Game 7, with a trip to the NBA Finals hanging in the balance, and Chet Holmgren took only 2 shots. And the part that makes it feel even worse, he did not attempt a single shot in the second half. That is not just a bad game. That is not just a cold night. That is the kind of performance that sends shockwaves to a franchise, wakes up every sports show in America, lights up every group chat, and forces one painful question into the middle of the room. Can Chet Holmgren really be that guy when Victor Wembanyama is standing in his way? Because this was supposed to be Oklahoma City's moment. The Thunder had the talent, they had the home crowd, they had SGA playing like an MVP, they had the young core, the confidence, the chemistry, and the entire league watching to see if they were ready to run the West for years. Instead, Game 7 turned into a nightmare. Wembanyama looked fearless. Chet looked frozen. The Spurs looked like a team arriving ahead of schedule. The Thunder looked like a team suddenly staring at a problem they may not be able to ignore anymore. And then after the game, when everyone expected answers, the situation only got stranger. Chet did not give the response fans wanted. SGA did not shut down the noise the way some people expected. And now the whole basketball world is wondering whether Oklahoma City is about to face the most difficult decision of its entire rebuild. So before we go deeper, let me know where you are watching from. If you think Chet just had one terrible night, comment 1. If you think OKC should seriously worry about his future, comment 2. And if you want real NBA drama, real analysis, and the stories behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe right now. The Thunder were supposed to own the West. Before we blame everything on one night, we have to understand why this loss hit Oklahoma City so hard. This was not some young team that accidentally wandered into the Western Conference Finals. This was not a cute underdog story. This was the Thunder, the team everybody believed was built to rule the West. They had the speed. They had the defense, they had the shooting, they had one of the smartest front offices in basketball, and most importantly, they had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander playing like the kind of superstar who could drag a franchise through fire. Everything about Oklahoma City felt ahead of schedule, but also strangely inevitable. For years, Sam Presti collected assets, built patiently, refused to panic, and waited for the right group to mature. Then suddenly, the plan became real. SGA turned into a true face of the league. Jalen Williams became a two-way weapon. The role players fit. The arena believed. And Chet Holmgren was supposed to be the final piece that made this team terrifying. A 7-footer who could protect the rim, space the floor, switch defensively, finish inside, and punish mismatches. That kind of player is not supposed to be easy to find. That kind of player is supposed to change your ceiling. And for most of the season, Chet looked exactly like that. That is why Game 7 felt so shocking. Because Oklahoma City did not lose like a team that simply ran out of talent, they lost like a team that suddenly discovered a matchup problem big enough to threaten everything. San Antonio did not just beat them on the scoreboard. The Spurs made the Thunder look uncomfortable in their own building. They slowed their rhythm, challenged their confidence, and forced OKC to ask whether their young core was really ready for the next level. And standing at the center of that question was Chet. When your second star disappears in a regular season game, people move on. When he disappears in Game 7 against the one opponent he may have to face every spring for the next decade, the conversation changes completely. This is why the noise is so loud. This is why the trade rumors started almost instantly. This is why every analyst is replaying those 2 shot attempts like evidence at a trial. Because the Thunder were not supposed to be exposed like this. They were supposed to be the future. But on that night, San Antonio looked like the future instead. Wembanyama did more than win the matchup. Victor Wembanyama did not just win a basketball matchup. He changed the emotional temperature of the entire series. Every time Chet Holmgren caught the ball, you could feel the building hesitate. Every time Wembanyama stepped toward him, the space seemed to shrink. It was not just about height. It was not just about wingspan. It was not just about block shots. It was about presence. Wemby made the floor feel smaller, the rim feel farther away, and every decision feel heavier than it should have been. That is what separates great defenders from terrifying defenders. A great defender contests your shot. A terrifying defender makes you question whether you should even take it. And by Game 7, It looked like Chet was asking himself that question every single possession. Should I attack? Should I shoot? Should I drive? Should I pass? Should I challenge him? And while those questions were running through his head, San Antonio was already winning the mental battle. That is the part Oklahoma City has to study all summer, because Chet has the tools. Nobody is saying he lacks talent. He can shoot. He can handle. He can protect the rim. He can run the floor. He can play modern basketball at a level most 7-footers could only dream about. But against Wembanyama, talent alone was not enough. Skill alone was not enough. Potential alone was not enough. Wemby forced him into a different kind of test. This was not a test of whether Chet could make a 3 in January. This was not about putting up numbers against an average front court. This was about whether he could stand across from the most intimidating young player in the league in the biggest moment of the season and still play with force. And the answer, at least on that night, was painful. Chet did not look like a rival. He looked like a player trying to avoid the direct collision. He drifted. He passed early. He moved away from contact. He let the game happen around him instead of forcing himself into it. Meanwhile, Wembanyama looked completely comfortable in the chaos. That is why this series feels bigger than one loss. It looked like the beginning of a rivalry, but instead of both young giants meeting in the middle, one of them took over the stage while the other faded into the background. The disappearing act was not one game. The mistake some people are making right now is treating Game 7 like it came out of nowhere. It did not. Game 7 was not the beginning of the problem. Game 7 was the moment the problem became impossible to hide. Because if you watch the entire series closely, you could see the warning signs building possession by possession, quarter by quarter, game by game. Chet Holmgren did not suddenly lose his rhythm in one night. His confidence had been leaking throughout the matchup. Earlier in the playoffs, he looked like a completely different player. He was aggressive, he was decisive, he was stepping into shots without hesitation. He was attacking space, protecting the rim, and playing like someone who believed he belonged on the biggest stage. Against the Lakers, he looked comfortable. He looked dangerous. He looked like the kind of second star Oklahoma City could trust. Then, San Antonio arrived. And suddenly, the same player who had been playing free started playing careful. The same player who had been attacking gaps started looking for exits. The same player who had been punishing defenses started reacting to the defense instead of forcing the defense to react to him. That is how a disappearance happens in the playoffs. It usually does not happen all at once. First, a player gives up one shot he normally takes. Then he passes out of one matchup he normally attacks. Then he starts drifting farther from the paint. Then he starts convincing himself he is making the right basketball play, even when deep down, he knows he is avoiding the hard one. By the time Game 7 arrives, the habit has already been formed. That is what made Chet's performance so alarming. It was not just that he missed shots. Missing shots is part of basketball. Great players miss. Stars go cold. Even legends have ugly nights. But Chet did not simply miss. He disappeared from the fight. And in playoff basketball, there is a massive difference between failing while attacking and fading while avoiding. Fans can forgive a player who goes down swinging. Teammates can live with missed shots if they come from courage. Coaches can adjust when a star is aggressive but inefficient. What nobody can easily explain is when a key player stops applying pressure altogether. That is the wound Oklahoma City is dealing with now. 2 shots in 33 minutes. There are bad stat lines. And then there are stat lines that follow a player into the offseason like a shadow. Chet Holmgren's Game 7 belongs in that second category. 4 points is already ugly. 2 shot attempts is worse. But 33 minutes is the number that makes the whole thing almost impossible to defend, because 33 minutes means he was out there long enough to impact the game. He was not buried on the bench. He was not injured out of the rotation. He was not some role player waiting in the corner for one clean look. He was on the floor. He had time. He had possessions. He had chances to demand the ball, to flash into space, to roll hard, to pop with confidence, to put his body into the action and make San Antonio feel him, but that never happened. And when a player of Chet's talent plays that many minutes and only takes 2 shots, the conversation moves beyond the box score. It becomes about mindset. It becomes about command. It becomes about whether he understood the urgency of the moment and whether he was willing to carry the burden that comes with being a franchise cornerstone. Because in Game 7, nobody is asking you to be perfect. They're asking you to be present. SGA did not need Chet to score 30. Oklahoma City did not need him to outplay Wembanyama possession for possession. But they did need him to compete with force. They needed him to make Wemby guard. They needed him to punish space. They needed him to take the open shot, attack the weak shoulder, crash the glass, and remind San Antonio that the Thunder had another star on the floor. Instead, the Spurs were allowed to tilt their attention elsewhere. That is the hidden damage of passivity. When a defense no longer fears you, it gets stronger everywhere else. Wembanyama can roam with more freedom. Help defenders can load up earlier. SGA sees more bodies, driving, lane shrink. Every teammate feels the pressure of the missing aggression. That is why those two shots were not just Chet's problem. They became Oklahoma City's problem. And that is why the Thunder front office cannot just shrug this off as one quiet night. In the playoffs, silence can be loud. And Chet's silence in that second half may have been the loudest sound of OKC's entire season. The press conference made it worse. After the final buzzer, the most important battle moved from the court to the microphone. Because sometimes what a player says after a painful loss can calm the entire situation down. A strong answer can tell the fans, the locker room, and the front office that he understands the moment. It can show accountability, it can show fire, it can make people believe the failure will become fuel. But Chet Holmgren's press conference did not do that. When reporters asked him about the matchup with Victor Wembanyama, the room was waiting for something direct. They were waiting for him to say he got the better of me. They were waiting for him to say, I have to be more aggressive. They were waiting for him to look into the cameras and make it clear that what happened in Game 7 would not define him. Instead, Chet went safe. He talked about the team, he talked about watching film, he talked about improving in the offseason. He leaned into the kind of professional answer that sounds mature on the surface, but in that moment, felt like it was missing the one thing everybody needed to hear. Ownership, and that is why the reaction became so intense. Fans were not just angry about the 4 points. They were not just confused by the 2 shots, they were listening for signs that Chet fully understood the weight of what had happened, but the words never really came. Now, to be fair, not every player processes disappointment the same way. Some players are emotional right away. Some need time. Some protect themselves publicly because the pain is still too fresh. Chet is young, and no one should pretend it is easy to sit in front of cameras after the worst night of your career while the whole basketball world is judging you. But this is the NBA. This is the price of being called a franchise cornerstone. When you sign up to be one of the faces of a contender, your silence gets analyzed, your body language gets replayed, your answers become part of the story. And on that night, Chet's careful response made the story feel even heavier. Because the question was simple. Was this just a bad series? Or did Wembanyama get inside his head? Chet had a chance to confront that question directly. He chose not to. SGA's answer shook the room. Then came the answer that turned a bad night into a franchise-wide conversation. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander sat in front of the cameras after the season ended, and every reporter in that room knew what the real question was. This was not only about a lost Game 7, this was about the future of Oklahoma City. This was about whether the Thunder still believed their core was strong enough. This was about whether Chet Holmgren was still untouchable. And when SGA was asked if he would give input on the team's offseason decisions, his answer was calm, clean, and almost too careful. He said no. He said he would not get involved. He said he trusted Sam Presti to do his job. He praised the front office. He stayed professional. He did everything a mature superstar is supposed to do. But in the NBA, timing changes everything. Because that answer came at the exact moment when fans were waiting for SGA to throw his full weight behind Chet. They wanted to hear, that is my guy. They wanted to hear, we are running it back. They wanted to hear, one bad series does not change what we built. Instead, SGA stepped aside and let the front office own the decision. That does not mean he wants Chet gone. That does not mean there is a locker room problem. That does not mean the Thunder are secretly broken. But it does mean the door did not slam shut. And when a superstar leaves even a small door open, the media will rush through it. That is why the quote exploded. SGA has enough power in Oklahoma City to change the tone of an entire offseason. If he had strongly defended Chet, the trade conversation would have cooled down immediately. But by choosing trust in Presti over public certainty about Chet, he gave the NBA world something to debate for weeks. And yes, SGA also said the Thunder need Chet. He acknowledged how important Chet has been to their rise. But even that support came with a quiet condition. When Chet is the best version of himself, Oklahoma City is the best version of itself. That is true. But after Game 7, it also sounded like a warning, because the best version of Chet was nowhere to be found when the Thunder needed him most. The trade machine exploded overnight. The second that final buzzer sounded, the internet did what the internet always does after a playoff collapse. It opened the trade machine, and suddenly, Chet Holmgren was not just a young all-star who had one brutal series. He was a trade asset. He was a question mark. He was the name being dragged into every blockbuster idea from Oklahoma City to Milwaukee to Los Angeles. That is how fast the NBA can turn on you. 1 week, you are the future. One bad Game 7 later, people are asking if your team should package you with draft picks and chase a superstar who can survive a war with Victor Wembanyama. Giannis Antetokounmpo became the loudest name immediately, and you can understand why. If Oklahoma City looked too thin, too hesitant, too finesse-heavy against San Antonio, Giannis represents the opposite. Power, pressure, rim force, transition violence without needing cheap drama. A player who would not spend a series wondering whether he should attack Wembanyama. He would attack first and deal with the consequences later. That is the appeal. Put Giannis next to SGA, and suddenly the Thunder become a different kind of monster. No longer just young, skilled, and smooth. Now they become physically overwhelming. Now they have someone who can bend a defense with brute pressure. Now Wembanyama has to absorb contact again and again instead of floating around the floor like a defensive nightmare. Then came the Anthony Davis conversations. Older, more complicated, more injury risk, but still a championship-level defender when healthy. Davis gives you size, experience, shot blocking, and a veteran presence that understands playoff pressure. For a team trying to win right now, that kind of profile is tempting. But here's the problem. Trading Chet is not simple. It is not just moving a player. It is admitting something about your original vision. It is saying that the young core you built may need a major correction. It is risking the future for the present. And if Chet goes somewhere else and becomes the star everyone believed he could be, Oklahoma City would have to live with that forever. That is what makes this debate so dangerous. Keeping Chet is a bet on patience. Trading him is a bet on urgency. And after Game 7, nobody in Oklahoma City can pretend that choice is easy anymore. Sam Presti's impossible decision. Now the pressure shifts to the one man in Oklahoma City who has to turn all this noise into an actual decision, Sam Presti. And that is what makes this situation so fascinating, because Presti is not a reckless executive. He does not build teams based on panic. He does not let one emotional playoff loss destroy years of planning. This is the same front office mind that collected assets when people laughed, stayed patient when people demanded shortcuts, and built one of the most dangerous young cores in the league without losing control of the future. So if Oklahoma City makes a move, it will not be because social media screamed loud enough. It will be because Presti sees something real. That is the terrifying part for Chet Holmgren. Because the Thunder have two paths now, and both come with serious consequences. Path one is loyalty. You keep Chet. You trust the talent. You accept that even great young players can get humbled by historically rare opponents. You remind yourself that Chet is still young, still developing, still skilled in ways almost no big man in the league can match. You tell the world that one ugly series against Victor Wembanyama does not erase an entire season of progress. That is the patient move. And honestly, there is a strong case for it. Players grow through embarrassment. Sometimes the worst playoff moment of a young star's life becomes the thing that forces him to level up. Chet could spend the entire offseason rebuilding his body, sharpening his counters, studying every possession, and coming back with the aggression that disappeared when OKC needed it most. But Path 2 is colder. Path 2 says SGA is ready now. The championship window is open now. Wembanyama is not waiting. San Antonio is not waiting. The West is not waiting. And if Oklahoma City already knows this matchup may haunt them every postseason, then maybe patience becomes risk. That is where the front office has to be. Brutally honest, can Chet be the second best player on a championship team if the road to the finals keeps running through Wembanyama? Can he survive that physical and mental battle 4 times in 7 games? Can he make San Antonio fear him? Or will the Spurs keep treating him like a player they can shrink when the lights get bright? Those are not easy questions. But great franchises do not avoid hard questions. They answer them before it is too late. Stumble or signal. So now we arrive at the question that will follow Chet Holmgren all summer. Was Game 7 just a stumble, or was it a signal? Because every great player eventually meets a moment that exposes something. Sometimes it exposes weakness. Sometimes it exposes fear. Sometimes it exposes a gap between talent and readiness. But the most important part is not the exposure itself. The most important part is what happens next. Chet Holmgren cannot change those 4 points. He cannot erase the 2 shot attempts. He cannot go back into that second half and suddenly become aggressive. That night is now part of his story. The camera saw it, the fans saw it, SGA saw it, Sam Presti saw it, and most importantly, Chet saw it. Now he has to decide what that memory becomes. It can become a scar that follows him, or it can become fuel. It can be the night people use against him forever, or it can become the night that forced him to grow into the player Oklahoma City still believes he can be. That is the human side of sports that people forget. These players are not machines. They fail publicly. They hurt publicly. They get criticized by millions before they even have time to process what happened. But greatness is not about never falling apart. Greatness is about answering when the world thinks it has already figured you out. For Oklahoma City, the lesson is just as serious. Talent is not enough. A young core is not enough. A beautiful rebuild is not enough. If the Thunder want championships, they need players who can survive pressure, contact, fear, expectation, and the psychological weight of facing someone like Victor Wembanyama again and again. Maybe Chet becomes that player. Maybe OKC decides it cannot wait. But whatever happens next, this moment will matter. Because in the NBA, one game can reveal a problem. One series can reshape a franchise. And one offseason can decide whether a team becomes a dynasty or becomes a warning store. Now I want to hear from you. Comment 1 if you think the Thunder should keep Chet and trust his growth. Comment 2 if you think OKC should trade him for a proven superstar. Like the video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more real basketball stories behind the headline.